Hello everybody, it's Farn here with Character Creation for Red Sands Part 5. Um, a little bit of sculpting has been done on this character since our last session. Um, and one of the things I wanted to discuss this time around is the principles of anatomy that I spoke about previously, as well as sort of the choices I'm making between real anatomy and sort of fantasy anatomy, and how to sort of reconcile the two to make characters make sense. And one of the things I do to make it possible for me anyway, to satisfy my sort of artistic endeavors in getting that anatomy to look correct. We're also going to discuss a little bit about some approaches for compression, stretching, making those joints look real, and sort of backing up some of the crazy choices we all have to make when creating characters so that in the end they seem feasible, and those working parts on your figure have a sense of reality about them. A good place to start is right here on the finger of this particular creature. One of the things that I do a lot is I reference my own fingers. They're right there. I can move them and position them in the way that the character might have them positioned, and get a sense of how they're going to move for this character. Creatures generally, if they're biped, you have to be thinking about a few things, I think, to give them believability. And one of them is, if they're intelligent, usually they grasp things. They can be tentacle-like digits or fingers as well, as long as they're able to manipulate their environment like an intelligent creature does. Is able to interact with it in a way that supports a story if you're working from a script, or supports your um, own stories in the world that you're creating for these characters. So I've gone a step further with all of this stuff, and the reason I'm creating World of Red Sands is so that these characters have a context. So my decisions when I create these characters have context, and I can put them in a setting and understand some of the physiology that's required for them, as well as make some choices anatomically based on gravity, what they look like, how they interact with their environment, what they hunt. Do they have defensive mechanisms? Are they a predator or a prey? That kind of thing. And all of the World of Red Sands started out like that. It's just the characters were getting stranger and stranger, and I just wanted some background and information to support my choices, and that's how Red Sands actually sprung into being, is just wanting context for all of these characters. And I think it's important to do, even if you're working on your own figures, your own sculptures, is that the story, once your figure's posed and is out there in the world, has some context. It makes it easier for the viewer to understand, and it lends credence to your decision making. And I think it shows a lot in your work as well. I certainly hope it shows up in mine when things are finished and posed. Um, Here's a good example of areas of compression. I actually use drapery reference when I start um, looking at skin in areas like this that have to move and stretch and be compressed. And skin and drapery move quite a bit like one another in the way that they fold, and I like taking reference from other places and bringing into the character, because in our minds, that just as a human being, in my mind, I understand that, and so when I see it on a creature, I still understand it, even though it's from a different area of reference. It still feels real because we've viewed it somewhere before. Um, I'll have V shapes in there, angular compression, Z style compression, so that the folds and wrinkles of skin actually feel um, very realistic, depending on how much flesh I want to have hanging around that joint. Um, you know, and I think it's perfectly okay to grab that reference from every place you can. It doesn't necessarily have to be animal in nature to make your animal look good, as long as we understand the you know, as artists, as long as we understand the principle of compression, it makes it a lot easier to apply that to our figure and have it um, feel real. Yeah, the forearm did not have enough. The flexors on the backside, there weren't enough. There wasn't enough mass for me there to make it make sense. So I had to pull that out a little bit and give it some more meat to be able to move that wrist and that finger in a way that seemed believable. So we've got a lot of things going on. There are areas of compression in behind the arm, under the arm, the elbows, the wrists, the fingers, the toes, the knees, and that crazy knee section that we started, or that I started to do. Um, there's a lot going on in that particular area. So, you know, it's when you look at um, emus or other birds with long limbs and they're in desert environments like an ostrich, for example, how much extra skin they have. It's amazing, but they need that to take up all the motion that the foot is created to do. So I went back in here and started looking at defining areas of smooth form against areas of hard bone, and then started wrapping those forms in skin, and an amount of skin that I thought was necessary to allow the joint to move fully without him breaking through his own skin. There has to, in my mind, be a sense of sort of the transfer of surface area from one side of the figure to the other. So in a compressed pose, it feels like there's enough skin there to cover the joint in a stretched pose. So um, you know, and when this character does finally get posed, you have to readdress areas like that. But here, you know, we're going to lay down, or I'm going to lay down a bunch of wrinkles that make this particular pose right now feel real, and then we can address that after posing it for its final shot, or you know, the image we're going to create from this particular one. You know, and I noticed here too, during addressing this area with wrinkles, just the structure did not feel right. So I went back, checked some more reference, at the very least for digits like this. And that is just, you know, it's an oddly placed digit, but it is a digit nonetheless. It has I think it's a three bone, three joint digit. So we have to have, you know, it's basically a finger. So there's hard spots and compression areas and flexors and extensors in that finger that have to be placed in. And I think that's what I've gone in now. I'm just redefining what the joint actually is, placing the compressors there and the flexors, and changing the shape of the bones so that, because there weren't enough as I was sculpting for me to, there wasn't enough difference in surface area between soft and hard edges to make that an interesting thing. It can't just be a tube of material with a couple of creases in it to make it look like a digit. There's a lot going on there. So I just made the bones look a little less tubular, and it helps to sell that as a real object or a real set of tissues, of different tissues. I mean, in principle, I mean, we touched on this a little bit in the last video, the principles of anatomy rather than sort of dedicating yourself to copying anatomy exactly out of a book or from particular animal reference. I think if you're going to study, I don't want to tell you what to do, but for me, what works for me, I guess, is the better way to put it, is I look at those references. I look at the similarity between fingers of different animals and what is similar about them. Our fingers have a set of flexors on the back side, or flexors on the front side, extensors on the back side. The joints are very similar. The motion is very similar that we're trying to create from character to character. And so the flesh, just in principle, the flesh should compress the same way as you would expect on a finger. So that's what I'm trying to put into the digit as I create it, and remembering that if it's a finger, it's a single bone. It has a fixed directionality. If we twist it the wrong way, it's going to break. So you have to, I mean, while I was creating this, I was thinking, well, this isn't something that can pronate or supinate. It's not something that can turn under uphand or downhand like our forearms. To do that, you need two bones. You need am I thinking of that right? I'm going to say it wrong. I'm going to say it anyway. Fibia, tibia? That's probably wrong. I'll go back and check that out in my reference. But the lower leg and the forearms have two bones to allow us to do some twisting left and right, and to articulate our wrists and our shins and our ankles, just to allow for flexibility and motion. And so you have to keep that in mind when you decide what what you're sculpting. Or I try to keep that in mind for when I'm sculpting, so that the joint fits the situation. He's going to use these front claws as defense mechanisms or attack. He will use them to balance himself in walking, to counterbalance those long forms off of his back. And I think that's one of the reasons why I chose to put them there, was to sort of counterbalance the forms that I pulled out so far in the silhouette. When I went back to think about those, that's what stuck out to me, is that they really balanced out the whole silhouette. So right there at the tip of the claws, we're putting in some forms of compression. We want the pads of that finger to bulge out. I mean, if you just take a minute to look at your own pointer finger, when it compresses, the skin begins to bulge in certain areas. There's sort of an apex of bulge, and they all converge into a point. So those creases in your joints all converge into a point in the first two joints of your finger. When you think about your characters and how they grasp and move, that is that particular point of compression is based on the proportion of the bones. Your bones of your character don't have to have that same point of compression, but you should consider that depending on what the digit is meant to do. So if it is a real hand, like a fully functioning 5 or 6 or 7 digit hand, and it's meant to grasp and articulate and do fine tasks, then you might want to consider the proportion of those fingers to allow your character to do that. In the case of these particular digits, they don't necessarily have to grasp or grab anything. They'll claw at you, they'll cut you, and he needs some length in that attack. So you want to keep your prey at a distance, and I think in justifying that in my mind, having those claws at the end of the long form makes sense. And they're not so weak in terms of bone structure there that they would crack under pressure. The finer the task, the finer the bones, I find.